Hello, and welcome to Professional Recognition and Leadership for Women in Emergency Medicine, Beyond Miscongeniality and Improving the Pipeline. Thank you so much for joining us. This didactic will consist of two panel discussions focusing on women, professional recognition, and leadership. Please feel free to put questions and comments in the chat during the discussions, and we'll try to answer them to the best of our abilities later. I'm Jessie Nelson. I'm core faculty at Regents Hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'll kick off the first panel with several of my colleagues from Regents Hospital. Drs. Kelly Behringer and Christy Grawl, both assistant program directors, and Dr. Emily Binstad, core faculty and director of simulation. None of us have relevant disclosures. Let's start with Dr. Behringer.
We're excited to be here today. We're going to start by talking through a couple of scenarios that happened in our institution that got our attention and got us talking about this topic. Like probably most, if not all programs, we have a really long fancy schmancy graduation at the end of the year to celebrate the graduates. Part of the ceremony is to hand out a bunch of awards. Most of these go to residents, but a few go to the faculty recognizing excellence in teaching. Year after year, the awards seem to be going to our male gendered colleagues. This year was no exception. All of the teaching awards that year went to men.
We realized that we could probably count on one hand the number of times women faculty ever won the teaching award. And since we're all now qualify as mid-career, we've been around for a while.
So we did some digging. It turns out that over the past 10 years of giving out these teaching awards, women are significantly underrepresented compared to how many women faculty we have working with residents. And women residents are even more underrepresented in the resident teaching awards.
Since we're pretty darn sure that we as a collective group of women faculty and resident teachers are at least equally skilled at teaching as our male colleagues, we don't think the problem was with us. We're assuming it's with the system. Perhaps there's some implicit bias at play.
So we formed an ad hoc focus group with female residents and faculty to gather reactions, brainstorm plausible etiologies, and develop an investigative path that led to several projects, including this didactic.
This group met on my deck, and adult beverages may or may not have been involved.
So we decided it was high time to overhaul our awards process and smash the patriarchy, all the usual things.
So while we were getting that done, we really began to think about why these disparities existed. Why were women underrepresented? And are there ways we could start to equalize the playing field?
You may wonder why this is even important. Awards at a graduation may not seem really like a big deal. We felt initially silly kind of even talking about this. We wondered if we were just making a big deal about nothing.
But actually, awards are kind of a big deal. They can matter for academic promotions and to build your CV. And it just feels good sometimes to be recognized in a public setting for all the work that you do. But most importantly, it's imperative that we try to figure out what in the system is allowing biases to persist, so we can continue to work to create systems that give women equal opportunities.
Anyway, as we dug deeper into this, it turns out our faculty teaching awards are probably chosen in a way that's really susceptible to bias. To be fair, there's not a ton of literature out there on the best way, but our system certainly doesn't seem to be the most equitable.
The person who received the faculty teaching award was typically the person who received the highest summative evaluation score from a very general, overall, how do you rate this teacher kind of question. And at first glance, that seems like a super reasonable way to do this. And after all, we've been doing this like 25 years.
It turns out, though, there are lots of ways of choosing an award like this that allow implicit bias to affect results.
First of all, like we mentioned, the award recipients are chosen from summative evaluations. We know from academic and teaching literature that summative evaluations are fraught with bias. Female educators tend to score lower than their male counterparts on teaching evaluations. Women faculty score lower in studies even when the actual course material and delivery is controlled, and the only difference is the gender of the teacher. So using this method is probably pretty problematic.
Not only are evaluations subject to bias against the one being evaluated, there is variation based on factors relating to the evaluator as well. Social science literature shows our evaluation of others are affected by our mindset at the time we are doing the evaluation. A study in 2008 showed that if the evaluator briefly held a cup of hot versus iced coffee in their hands prior to doing an evaluation, the evaluatee was judged to be more warm.
And when we're evaluating someone, we are making decisions. The same factors that we know affect our ability to make decisions likely have some impact on our evaluations. There's a fairly easy to remember mnemonic, HALT, HALT. Basically, don't make important decisions when you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
So how does this apply to our situation? Well, it turns out that the question of overall, how do you rate this teacher, is one of about 20 questions on the yearly faculty evaluation that the residents fill out. And we have more than 30 faculty. And these are residents. They're already tired, not to mention hungry, angry, and lonely. And it's tough to get through that many evaluations. It's the perfect scenario to let evaluation fatigue and life fatigue allow someone's implicit biases to interfere with good judgment.
Finally, the residents didn't even know this question was being used to determine the end of the year faculty teaching award, and the question didn't exactly define what the award should honor. What makes a teacher worthy of an award? Do we honor the funniest teacher, the most well-liked, the most effective, the most innovative, the one who brings the best snacks? Our system didn't define this at all.
So we started asking ourselves in our program leadership team, how can we change the system and create a more equal playing field? The obvious answer is by trying to minimize potential bias, but how exactly do we do that? I wish we could say that we have all the answers, and spoiler alert, we don't, but we do have some ideas. We'll get to those in a few minutes.
A couple of months after we submitted an abstract on gender bias in faculty teaching awards, another scenario came up that got our attention. We were sitting in a residency leadership meeting, and the names of nurses who were in consideration for a nursing teaching award chosen by residents were announced. And kind of surprisingly, or I guess maybe not, all of the nurses who were nominated were men. In a department with 70% female nursing staff, all 5 or 6 of the top nominees were male. And we weren't the only ones that noticed.
We started getting texts from several of the women residents who were frustrated by this.
The first departmental response was maybe typical. Probably this was just an outlier year. We've had lots of female recipients in the past. We've been doing it this way for 25 years. Don't overreact. However, when we looked at who actually received awards over the past several years, it turns out that only 30% of nursing teaching awards had gone to women.
So again, let's back up and look at the system. After every emergency department rotation, residents are asked in their end of rotation survey which nurse they would like to nominate for the end of the year teaching award. The nominees for the award came from this list. Despite the wording, many of the residents, especially the more junior ones, didn't realize they were choosing someone to receive an award at the end of the year.
Also, this process was reliant on recall. The resident had to remember a specific nurse's name out of a pool of 150 plus nurses. And as interns, they only spend 3 months in the department total over the year. Were the men truly better teachers? Or was it just easier to remember their names when it came to write in somebody on the nomination form since there are fewer men? Also, and obviously we're super stereotyping here, men tend to be louder. At least in our institution, men are proportionately in more shift leadership roles, such as charge nurse and trauma resource nurse. Were men truly better teachers, or did they just get noticed more?
So now we've talked to 2 examples of awards given in our institution, why it matters, and where our current system potentially exacerbates gender bias. Now that we have identified and understand some of the problems, let's review the literature and talk about some possible solutions.
So we've discussed 2 scenarios where bias may have impacted who was granted awards in an academic emergency department. We suspect there are many additional examples that exist in multiple aspects of our professional and personal lives. But rather than wallowing in all of that, what are the actions we can take to mitigate this type of inequity? Here are some pearls from the literature. Awardees can be selected through various methods, but each is vulnerable to bias, and each has unique strategies that we can use to counteract bias.
Our examples here use metric-based selection processes. An overall score is essentially a Gestalt assessment. This type of assessment is especially vulnerable to popularity contest type responses that are automatic, not well thought out or considered, and made without any significant reflection about the importance of the award or the specific values that the award is supposed to recognize.
Any award selection process where quick and easy is the primary goal becomes uniquely vulnerable to bias and to the influence of stereotypes. Instead of Gestalt scores, using a composite score may help decrease bias. where specific attributes are scored, then combined for a final overall score.
Other award selection methods are also listed here. These can also be prone to inequities. For instance, who is on the nominating committee? Who selects amongst the nominees? How is this process conducted? Is there an anonymous initial vote prior to discussion? Whose views and voices are heard? Is it transparent?
Standards-based awards seem fairer on the surface, but we know men are disproportionately likely to apply for jobs where they don't meet all the employment criteria, and then exceptions are made, where equally or more qualified women follow the rules and don't apply because they feel they don't meet all the criteria. One would assume that similar issues may arise with standards-based awards.
So according to Shelley Carell, a professor of sociology at Stanford University, gender bias is informed by common stereotypes surrounding men and women, which lead to unfair decision-making, often to the advantage of men. Overall, she suggests 6 ways to eliminate gender bias in the workplace. First, educate employees about how stereotypes work. When employees know that stereotypes are often used as a type of shortcut to give an easy answer when we feel rushed and stressed, they tend to scrutinize their own decision-making more carefully, and that tends to break the tendency to use stereotypes as a shortcut.
Number 2, establish clear criteria for evaluation. The more formal and explicit the criteria are, the more women and more underrepresented minorities will be hired.
Number 3, scrutinize your criteria. Are they the right criteria? Do they predict success on the job? Are they filtering out a disproportionate number of women? If so, it's really important to understand if the criteria really matter in terms of who's going to be successful on the job.
4, hold decision makers accountable. Having to explain the decisions we make to others forces us to reevaluate and breaks the tendency to use stereotypes as a shortcut.
5, be transparent. Post the numbers and keep track of our progress in terms of how we're doing in terms of gender diversity in our workplaces.
And finally, 6, vouch for the competence of women leaders. Be proactive. Whenever you have the chance to introduce someone or talk about someone you're working with, describe her accomplishments or talk about how successful you think she's been.
Although these principles apply more broadly to gender equity in the workplace, they inform and echo our effort to mitigate award disparities as well. After reviewing the literature looking for specific actions we could take to mitigate bias in awards in academic emergency medicine, we summarize here the main 3 categories of best practices.
So the first category is to simply acknowledge that historical bias exists. This pans out in the literature over and over again. Bias just exists. Secondly, make the award selection committee and participants do the work and be held accountable. Finding a good committee is important. Include a variety of personality and experience. Promoting rigorous, thoughtful analysis of your processes can reduce bias. And finally, make your methods work for you. As we've looked at our own award system, we've had some good conversations as a group and leadership team about how our methods are problematic and starting to develop some possible ways to fix them. Some of the solutions we've talked about include moving away from problematic summative evaluations, defining specific criteria for each award to hopefully avoid popularity contests and gestalt responses, avoiding awards where the resident is dependent on recalling a specific individual from a large list, providing a list of names and photos. We've also talked about minimizing the resident HALT, hungry, angry, tired, lonely impact of filling out evaluations if possible. For example, by giving residents dedicated time to complete nominations and minimize evaluation fatigue.
So we'll stay on this slide, Jesse.
Okay.
We'll spend a little more time on each of these 3 best practice themes that were on the prior slide. The first of that is acknowledge historical bias exists. So we know that the recognition of various isms and discussion about implicit bias prior to decision-making about awards or evaluation or promotion can actually mitigate some of the influence of implicit bias on those decisions. And we can definitely promote awareness of implicit and bias individually through use of tools like the Harvard Implicit Association Test, and in our departments and in institutions more systemically by supporting DEI awareness and initiatives. But when it comes to counteracting the effect of implicit bias in awards, don't be ashamed to talk about the presence of previous disparities in award distribution. In fact, publicizing prior award data may alone be enough to make future responses more equitable. When publishing this data, however, it's key to ensure that this doesn't somehow imply tacit acceptance that past disparities reflect how things should be, or even hopelessness that they always will be that way. Include a mandate for change with your past data. Also, put the burden on the surveyed people to be better than those in the past. For example, a statement after the data from prior years could be, please know that the stereotypes here are often used as a shortcut that increase bias. Prioritizing your completion time over thoughtful consideration increases the risk that you will contribute to and perpetuate societal problems with bias. Please do not complete this questionnaire when you're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or otherwise distracted. These applicants all deserve your full attention and effort. So that's just kind of a way to summarize that concept. And it's okay to literally put that at the top of your survey or your form that you want filled out. Secondly, the concept of holding decision makers accountable. Make it common knowledge in your institution and department that rigorous, thoughtful analysis reduces bias, and thus this standard of effort is expected from everyone always. Award selection should not be tacked on to another survey to make it easier. Making award or hiring or promotion decisions easy makes them more prone to bias. Again, warn participants away from doing this important work when any of the halt factors are present. Force people to select the criteria they think are most important in ideal award recipient prior to considering the candidates. Then they're more likely to choose a person with that criteria rather than defaulting to a stereotype. Another option is requiring justification of chosen candidates with specific reasons. This may also help reduce stereotyped and biased decisions. Finally, choose methods that reduce bias. Ultimately, this can be summarized by first, carefully defining the awards criteria, and second, welcoming non-traditional techniques that keep the process fresh and thus keep the power of stereotypical responses at bay. So first, define and prioritize the best attributes of an ideal candidate, then scrutinize those criteria for any gendered words and eliminate them. Examples of gendered words might be powerful and ambitious for men or compassionate and hardworking for women. Although these words obviously can apply to people from both genders, studies show that these words are associated with certain genders and may lead to unanticipated bias if used in award criteria. Do not include any unnecessary requirements that eliminate anyone's legitimate eligibility. Choose a diverse nominating committee. Don't compare notes until everyone has created their own short list of candidates to ensure that all diverse voices are heard. Obviously, use blinding whenever possible. And when blinding is impossible, consider creative rating tools, as even making those traditional structures less boring and less traditional may allow people to escape their own unwitting stereotypical responses and be more equitable. One study found that instead of using a traditional 1 to 10 rating scale where highly performing women were given 8s and 9s and highly performing men received 10s, when you change the rating scale to 1 to 6, highly performing men and women all received 6s. Hopefully, these tips can help as we try to make recognition for professional awards more equitable for women and underrepresented minorities in medicine.
Thank you for that overview, Dr. Benstedt. Let's transition to a different sort of recognition or lack thereof. At a recent staff meeting, the topic of recent scholarly activity and productivity came up.
Our research director discussed highlights with a PowerPoint slide listing all the accepted abstracts and presentations for upcoming conferences this year. There was a common theme. All of the listed faculty members, with 2 exceptions, were men.
So what was missing from this list?
This talk.
A similar didactic we did at Cord.
And one of our female residents' research projects.
So when I discreetly let him know that he missed some submissions by female authors, he felt terrible. And he very publicly apologized and listed all the missed acceptances in a follow-up email to the entire department.
Interestingly, though, this isn't the first time this has happened. So we started thinking, why is this happening? How are these presentations and abstracts getting missed? How does he get the information that he includes in these emails? Is he even aware of the work that we're doing?
Could this be a gender thing? Is it because this doesn't quite fit into the research bucket? He finds out a lot about emergency medicine research since he's on the IRB, and this project didn't go through the IRB. He was asked about the department head for an update. So how does he even find out what we're doing?
So our colleagues may have many extraordinary skills, but psychic ability is not one of them. They find out what we're doing when we tell them what we're doing. We can do a better job of amplifying our successes.
We know that talking about our own accomplishments can be uncomfortable for many. We are from the land of passive aggressive Minnesota nice, after all.
So if talking about yourself is too unnatural, you can make it a point to celebrate the successes of women and underrepresented colleagues around you, as well as your own. But the bottom line is that we really need to get used to this.
It's not hard to find descriptions of the problems with equality. We've tried to focus on actions that can be taken, but we also need to remember we are just as capable as our male colleagues to play the game in order to level the playing field.
Meanwhile, and maybe in response to this, or perhaps because this group has been speaking out to anyone who listen about the equity issues for over a year now,
our department director decided to help us play the game a little bit. He went all in to rig the system in our favor this time.
So you know those top doc awards, the ones where they ask area physicians to nominate their colleagues as a top doc in the area and then publish a list of them annually?
I always thought those were ridiculous.
so I've received emails asking me for nominations, and I usually delete them because it seems like a silly popularity contest that's not at all applicable to emergency medicine.
However, readers do look at this list when picking other specialists. Whether the information is accurate or not, it is one of the few sources of information for lay people to look at. And my mother looks every year to see if I'm in it, and random parents from our soccer team congratulate us, even though we may not think this award matters, other people notice.
Anyway, out of the blue, and we later realized with no prompting from any of us, our department head emailed all the physicians in our group stating that he's planning on voting for several specific women physicians in our department and listed the reasons why. He then encouraged our staff physicians to vote similarly.
Lo and behold, a few months later, in Minnesota Monthly Magazine Top Doc Awards for Emergency Medicine, 4 of our women docs were listed. Without our department head's intervention, really doubt that would have happened.
So the process for this award meets absolutely none of the best practices criteria we've discussed. Yet that's what patients and colleagues are seeing.
But if these awards are so flawed, why do they continue? What's the point anyway? Well, it all depends on your point of view.
Patients want to see qualified physicians. If a magazine is recommending someone, they must be good, right? Plus, friends, family, and colleagues notice, and it just makes you feel good to be recognized.
The process may be flawed, but it's not going away. We can stand on a pedestal and look down our noses at this, but then we are not really in a position to complain when we aren't listed.
While being placed on one of these lists isn't an R01 grant or a published manuscript, there is a place for this on a CV. Reputation matters to processes like promotion and tenure. We can and probably should play the game.
Our department head sent one email. That motivated me to go to the page and put in nominations for several specialties. Playing the game doesn't have to be all that hard, and recognition still matters. In closing, we found a great description of why recognition matters from a website called the Awesome Awards. Recognition is a powerful yet often overlooked way of celebrating people and letting them know that they are appreciated and valued. Think of recognition as a big hug from your community. When people are recognized, they tend to feel engaged, inspired, energized, and confident. We can build a better world by recognizing and celebrating the people and qualities that we think are awesome. Recognition is a great way to bestow confidence, cultivate leadership, build social capital, and make people happy. Thank you.
So we are going to transition to our second panel directly. If you have questions or comments, feel free to place them in the chat and we'll get them to them at the end of the session.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining and thank you for that really wonderful talk. And we're going to continue all along with that theme. And just so you know, that there's going to be times for questions towards the end of the panel. But we're going to talk about women being underrepresented as well, but in the arena of emergency medicine leadership. So we really want to call for faculty development methods for improving the pipeline and the processes for which women achieve leadership positions in emergency medicine. Are you able to see my slides, by the way?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. So we have a great panel of people. I'm gonna let Dr. Meryl Pampolino introduce them as we go from panel guest to panel guest. But these are some of the panelists that we will have. And just a little bit of a background as to why we're doing this. And you heard a little bit about it through the first panelist. Is there really is a gap. So if you look at emergency medicine and some of the data for residents and fellows, we comprise about 36% women, whereas for faculty members, it's about 28%. And this is despite the fact that in 2019, over 50% of all medical school students were females. And then if you look at women who are academic chairs, the numbers drop significantly. And we're very fortunate to have representation of one of the few academic chairs in emergency medicine on our panel. So I'm gonna hand it over to Dr. Meryl Pampolino. She is an assistant professor of emergency medicine at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and she will be our moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Kwan. All right, everyone. So we will start off this panel with a few opening questions. You will then hear from Dr. Kat Ogle, who will provide a good summary of our discussion, and then we will open things up to questions from the audience. So feel free to drop some questions over in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. But leading us off is Dr. Gail D'Onofrio. Dr. D'Onofrio is the professor and chair of emergency medicine at the Yale School of Medicine. Dr. D'Onofrio, as department chair and physician scientist, how have you been able to promote leadership for women inside your department?
Okay, so thank you for that question, and thank you all for being here. So I just start out with just saying that promoting can be gender neutral in the beginning parts, and that is that we start early by developing goals and measurable objectives for every faculty member. And those objectives need to have short and long-term objectives associated with them, and they really need to have action plans and timelines that are associated. What I find particularly with women is that women tend to be pretty inclusive of the world. So whether that's their family, whether they have children or not children, or they're caregivers for their parents, or they are caregivers for the residency, as we just have seen, they want to take on tasks because they can generally multitask much better. They can get something done. And we also always know that if you want something done, give it to a busy person. So they tend to reach out for those things. And what I will try to do is make sure that people do have their set core of people who are helping them progress through their academic careers. And we're making sure that all of their activities kind of align with their goals. And if they're going to do some work that we all have to do to be good citizenship, that work is associated with their goals and objectives. And it's not some outrageous thing that's beyond it. Or they're very set tasks that they can do fairly quickly, because we know that everyday urgencies will always overwhelm our academic careers. So they need to be able to sit down, look at the calendar. What do you want to be accomplished this year? How are you going to do that? And set those kinds of timelines that have to be done. Because there's so much else that women have to do, they tend to overlook all of this. The end of the year comes and they wonder, why didn't I do anything? So the answer is to be proactive. And what we can do as women, because women chairs do get more women, we know that, and we promote more and we retain more women. So we have to be kind of careful in making sure that we address certain things, like getting them involved when they should be involved and when they shouldn't be involved, and network within their institution and outside their institution, and get them in projects where they can really take off from the very beginning. I could go on and on, but I think that that's the most important thing, that we guide other young women into how to negotiate their path early in their career, and make sure that their path, if they want to be a physician scientist or an academic, and that path is very set forward, because you need to be focused early on and you need to plan. There's one thing that women will have to do their entire life, is it will always be planned. And I can't help that, but you're going to plan your hour by hour, down to the minute.
All right, thank you, Dr. D'Onofrio. Our next panelist is Dr. Michelle Lahl. Dr. Lahl is an associate professor of emergency medicine and is the inaugural director for Wellness, Diversity, and Equality at Emory University. Dr. Law, what can we do from a residency standpoint to help our female residents gain that leadership experience and develop their leadership skills?
Thank you for having me today, Meryl. So I think one of the things that is really important that Dr. D'Onofrio mentioned too is really this idea of mentorship and sponsorship, right? Young women need to see women in leadership and say, you know what, that could be me. I see someone who looks like me and I can do this too. So some strategies that can be really important also include, perhaps affinity groups. In our institution, we have a women's group, and it's an affinity group that spans our advanced practice providers, residents, fellows, and faculty. And we meet twice a year as a big group, but then quarterly as a small group. And there's some really fabulous discussion that comes out of that. I think it's important for the entire residency to have a journal club or some sessions dedicated to the inequities that currently exist in medicine, so that we can all be on the same page and we can all understand and recognize that this is a real phenomenon. I think the other thing that's very important is many of the medical schools that our residency programs are affiliated with do offer leadership training programs. Sometimes those are limited just to the chief residents, but other times they're not. And I think it's critically important that we are encouraging our women residents to run for chief resident, and if they are selected, that they are able to go to these leadership programs, whether they're at the medical school level or at the national level, like here at SAEM, where we typically have the chief resident forum. I think, additionally, offering national affinity groups for women to our residents and our medical students who are interested in emergency medicine is critically important. The network of women in emergency medicine is growing. It's much larger than it was even when I entered residency, but there's still more work to be done. So there's amazing groups like AWEM, which is part of SAEM, AWEP, which is part of ACEP, to join and collaborate and to help our women see other examples of women doing the roles they want to do in their career, and watching us maybe not so eloquently balance it, but as Dr. D'Onofrio said, learning how to schedule it so that you can make it work.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Law. Up next, we have Dr. Tony Sapal. Dr. Sapal is a professor and chair of emergency medicine, as well as a CCO at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and he's also my boss. So, Dr. Sapal, what challenges have you faced while trying to promote the pipeline for women, both inside and outside of your department?
Meryl, great question. And I do want to say hello to everyone that has joined both of these panels. Thank you so much for deciding to listen to us and learn. Meryl, I've been very, very fortunate as chair of our department in that we've had a tremendous number of talented women that wanted to stay with us and join the team. When I first got here, that was not necessarily the case. And it was one of my fears of coming to Arkansas, is that it would have been an old boys network, and that's just what the institutional culture was. Fortunately, it was not. And I really think that it takes dedication from leaders, and has to be the chair of the department, but it also has to be the institution, because if there are barriers there, it's going to be a very, very difficult journey to diversify your faculty. And from my standpoint as department chair, I truly believe that having a diverse faculty makes us stronger and makes us better. And so that takes a little bit of work. First of all, you've got to be able to be the person that defends that philosophy and live that every single day in the way we recruit. And I'm really happy to see not only you on this call, but some really, really talented UAMS women faculty, because without them, we really wouldn't be where we are. And as it turns out, as you know, but I'll share with the rest of the group, I believe we're one of the few departments in the country that has an all-female program leadership team. And it's those types of things, along with everything that Gail has said and Dr. Lal and others, promoting our women to not only leadership roles within the department, within the institution, but throughout the nation and outside of the organization. So for example, we have a female leader at the Arkansas Department of Health. That begets more diversity, and not just gender diversity, which of course is important, but all forms of diversity, which I firmly believe is a requirement and should really be mandated in emergency medicine, as well as medicine in general. The data, to me, and the data shared today should be shocking to every single male leader, and quite frankly, every single female leader in medicine. It is true. Those numbers don't lie, and we have a lot of work ahead of us to make this right, which is why I'm so glad to see the number of individuals listening today. Clearly, there's a groundswell here, and it's something that we need to continue to tout. So, what you may not remember, Meryl, because it was before you got here to train as a resident, was we only had two, and what I would say we had three women, one of whom was only quarter time in our department. We've grown tremendously over the last decade, and now we are close to 50% women amongst our faculty, as well as other forms of diversity, which is really tremendous. And the two hires, and I know Dr. D'Onofrio and others here from other academic programs recognize just how slim the job market is this year. Our two hires, both women this year, and they're both awesome. Matter of fact, one of them's on the call right now, Dr. Von Dolan. So, this is something that we need to celebrate. It's something that I think we need to be very, very explicit about. And, I think in the past, people were embarrassed about this. And it's not something we have to be forthright. Otherwise, we're not going to succeed because, quite frankly, women are, well, actually, if you talk to my wife, better than men. And I'm not afraid to say it. We have awesome female faculty around the country, especially at UAMS, and it's something that we need to foster more of. So pleased that I could be on this panel and allowed to share my thoughts. Happy to answer any questions later on, or if anyone wants to contact me, they're welcome to do that.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sapal. And last but not least, we have Dr. Salvador. Dr. Salvador is Associate Professor of Emergency Medicine. She is also the Associate CMO and Senior Vice President for Medical Affairs at Northwell Health. Dr. Salvador, what would you tell women looking into leadership positions outside of the emergency department?
Thank you, Meryl. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today as well. I often get questions about, what caused you or what made you want to join, actually do a role outside of emergency medicine. And that wasn't my intention because I loved emergency medicine. I imagined myself being a program director and later on a chair. But I was asked to do several positions outside of emergency medicine, starting with being an associate medical director for a hospital, and now a system role where I oversee 23 different facilities in our system. And what I like to tell women is just go for it, do it. Because I think what happens, and I did it early on in my career, is I questioned myself, do I have the ability to do that? Someone mentioned before, as women, we do the checkoff lists. We look at the criteria and we say, do I have this, and I'm going down the list. Men just do it. They don't even have half of the criteria, and they just say, I can do it, and they're already looking for their next job. So if you're passionate about it, as a leader, do it, because what the key is to surround yourself with people that are, I say surround myself with people that are even smarter than me and let them teach me, because that building a team and building the right team is what makes leaders successful. I really, believe in that the team members are our most valuable asset. So again, if you're interested in a job outside of emergency medicine, remember that emergency medicine make the best physicians for these outside roles. They make great medical directors because we've done it. We've done it all, right? We're used to dealing with departments. We're used to conflict resolution. We're used to dealing with bad physicians. We deal with that on a regular basis. We're used to making decisions fast. A lot of times you need to make decisions fast. Emergency medicine are in the right roles to do these types of jobs. Many emergency medicines physicians get roles in system level because, again, people ask, well, how's your job now compared to when you were in the emergency medicine? And I say, it's the same job I had in emergency medicine, just on a bigger level, because all of the things that I deal with now are similar to when I was in emergency medicine. It's just in a bigger scope. And again, a lot of emergency medicine make for great physicians to go into government jobs, things like, working for the state. And we worked very closely in New York with the Department of Health when it was COVID and with the COVID vaccine rollout, because of the skills of emergency medicine. And as women, we have excellent skills at multitasking. So if you want to roll outside of emergency medicine, a woman emergency medicine is a perfect candidate. So go for it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Salvador. Dr. Ogle, I'm going to head it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pampalona. All right, everyone, I am Dr. Kat Ogle. I am an assistant professor, hopefully soon to be an associate professor at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I am the ultrasound fellowship director. I also am the co-chair for our clinical competency committee, and I hold several leadership roles on clerkships at the university. So my role today is to try to sum up all of these pearls that our incredible leaders have put together. So I'm going to give you really just the Reader's Digest version, and look at my Twitter feed later because I'll put all this stuff up there. But from Dr. D'Onofrio, what I'm hearing is it is absolutely essential for you to be focused, proactive, and to be a planner. You have got to set your short-term and long-term goals and really have the long game in your mind. So that's really what I'm kind of taking away from Dr. D'Onofrio. And also make sure that your mentors and your sponsors are engaged in that process. From Dr. Lal, more about mentorship and sponsorship, but also ensuring that you have folks in leadership positions that residents can look up to, right? You also need to consider making the discussion part of the daily process, part of the culture, part of your journal club, so that everybody is thinking about this. And encourage your residents to take on leadership roles in areas outside of your organization, like AOM and the like. So for Dr. Sopal, absolutely a call to action to anyone in leadership to make these efforts for diversity explicit, transparent, and forthright. It has to be at the core of what your organization is doing. Otherwise, it's not going to be successful. And as Dr. Sopal said, we are not where we need to be. And ultimately, diversity makes us stronger in all categories. For Dr. Kelly, pull up your bootstraps and do it. Just put your name out there, put your heart out there. If it's something that you're passionate about, or if it's something that's going to challenge you, you will absolutely grow. You've got to build your internal board of directors, build your team so that you can be tremendously successful. And that's really how it all pulls together.
All right, Dr. Ogle, thank you so much for that summary. We will now be taking questions from the audience. Let me go ahead and check if we have any questions in the chat.
One suggestion I would make is that we're gonna we saved the Q&A for both groups, both panels. So you know, I think one of the things we want to do is to make it a little bit more interactive, and just if everybody can put on their cameras, keep on mute, and then if you, I don't know if there's a hand raising function, but just if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and then let us know which panel, if both, that you're addressing, and then somebody will pick up the question.
There is a hand raising feature, so if y'all just put on the gallery view, then we can call folks as they raise their hand. We do have stock questions if you all don't have any, but we encourage you to bring your questions to the forefront.
Yeah, please don't be shy. This is a time for, you know, SAM, for us to connect with each other and network and talk about best practices. So we do want to hear some questions from the audience.
This is a question for either panel. I'm Shoshana. I'm an intern at University of Michigan. I'm wondering if any of you have advice on the phenomenon of saying yes to too many things and trying to pick which things to selectively say yes to for your own, like, experience learning and gaining leadership roles. I feel like, I know I personally and a lot of my female co-residents have a tendency to say yes to too many things, which can dilute your efforts from the things that matter the most for your own career building or your learning. So I'm curious who can give some insights into doing better at that.
Who would like to pick up that question?
I'm just going to say that if you look around at the faces when you were asking that question, you brought a smile to pretty much every woman's face on this entire gallery view, because I think that is a universal experience. As to the solutions, I think that's probably more varied as to what individuals have done. But Apparently our group is saying that Dr. Jessie Nelson is the expert in our group on this subject. So I'm going to defer to her.
I'm only an expert because I'm a recovering yes sayer for years and years. And I've exercised my no, and it's so much fun. I think the big thing is figuring out your priorities, like what actually matters to you. And as an intern, you need to learn emergency medicine. So you have such a long career ahead of you. Don't shut too many things, but remember, you have a very focused, just learn emergency medicine right now. If it's kind of interesting, great. But I tend to, if it's something that I'm super interested in, great. If I'm not that interested into it, probably not. If it's something that actually pays, that weighs into it, nothing pays for you, so that doesn't matter. But if it's something that you think will advance your career and you really like it, and it's not a huge time suck, maybe, but no is okay.
I'll share one word of advice as a department chair, and that is seek mentorship, especially those that have been there, done that. I've fallen into so many potholes and problems in the past that I try to steer my faculty away from, that can help balance your load a little bit. And also, I think it's great to have someone that can tell you it's okay to say no. Because when you do say no, I think we get this feeling that we failed somehow, or we're letting someone down, or we're lazy, whatever the connotation is. That absolutely is not the case. So that would be my advice. There are plenty of other solutions, however, and I'm sure some of our panelists can either share that or we can talk about it in the chat.
So I'd like to follow that up with two things. Number one, Namita has raised her hand, so I want her to be able to ask her question next. But I wanted to also bring to your attention that yesterday, Dr. D'Onofrio did a session with us in AWEM about how to say no. And she says, I put on my chair hat and I ask you to do this thing, and then I take my chair hat off and I become your mentor and say, don't do that. That doesn't meet your goals. And then I put my chair hat back on. I'm like, come on, you want to do this thing, right? And I take my chair hat off. So you need that mentor. All right, Namita, what's your question?
So I think there are a lot of hospital leaders, department chairs who want to get more engaged in this topic of gender diversity, promoting their women. And I think sometimes it's very easy for their priorities to get pulled in different directions. Do you have any tips for how to re-engage or keep them on somewhat of the track that they started on?
So I'll try that. You're saying that maybe someone else puts them on a track? Is that your question?
More that, say they start off and, for example, very supportive of starting a women in emergency medicine network within the department and being supportive of that activity. But a year or two goes by and you notice, well, we're not necessarily moving the needle to more leadership positions that have equity. And I don't think it's necessarily a lack of want, but it may be something came up that pulled their attention. And so the question would be like, how do you bring their attention back to this topic and get them refocused?
So the individual or the leader of the emergency, to get the individual more focused? The leader. So I think in general, it's having actionable items that people have done. I think my biggest difficulties is that people are not being promoted because they've been here so many years and they just need to get promoted, or they want to get promoted, so they're there. They have to have the opportunities and the mentoring group to move forward, but the reason you move forward is based on your CV and what you've accomplished. So I think sometimes women don't understand that. They've, again, said yes to all these tasks, none of which really are on their CV or on their CV supplement. And then you get forward, you go, well, why aren't I up there? And you're not up there because you don't have a CV to get up there. So then it's either my fault or their section chief's fault of why they aren't. So I think, again, that goes back to being very laser focused on where you want to be, whether that's in educational scholarship, that's in hardcore research, clinical trials, or anything else that you're doing, that you are laser focused in doing that. It isn't a career goal to be, I don't know how to say this PC wise, but it's not a career goal to be up there and be a representative for women all over the world. All right. That's not the career. For me, I can just say what I do in my research is hopefully making sure that other women know that they can be independently funded researchers and physician scientists. I'm not up there to constantly talk about women. I'm here at SAM, but the goal is my research, and I'm known, and that's what I've excelled at, even though I'm one of very few women as chairs. In terms of the clinical, of course, we have basic scientists here who have won Nobel Prizes, so I'm not in that category. But in terms of the clinical chairs who do clinical research and are funded, I'm probably the most funded of those, and that's how I'm known for my research. All right, and that's how I want to be known. I don't want to be known that I'm like this so many tiny little women chair. I want to be known for what I do, and that's a big issue that I think you all need to, you want to be known for what you do, not for your gender, not for whatever, but because you're the best you are in that particular, whether you're the best educator, whether you are the best researcher, whether the best, whatever you choose to be best at. That's how women excel, by other women seeing women who have done amazing things in the field of EM.
I'm gonna echo some of Gail's comments, and I'll add this, Namita. I think it's a really great question. If a leader in this case is truly sincere about the intent to promote women, it's okay to hold your chair or the leader accountable. That accountability goes both ways. So if the female faculty are truly outstanding, and for whatever reason we're dropping the ball, then we need to know that, or I need to know that. My faculty make me aware of things all the time, because no one's perfect. Chairs certainly are not perfect, and this is a process. It's going to take work, and so if it means we need to dedicate whatever the example is here, developmental funds or resources, or think about things in a different or more creative way, then we should be able to work together to attain those goals. And with the understanding that we're probably going to get it wrong once or twice before we get it right, but the payoff at the end would be tremendous and worth the journey.
And I just want to add one other thing to that, and this isn't in the ED. Like I wasn't an academic person; I was more of an operational person. But for the first part of my career, I went to my chair. I told them I wanted to do more administrative stuff. I asked them, to teach me. At the time, we were acquiring multiple hospitals, and every physician that went to those other hospitals were male. In the 14 years that I worked in that department, not a single female was ever promoted or asked to become an ED director at one of the other sites. And it's unfortunate. And sometimes you have to actually leave. It took me leaving that department to go to another department, where then I got promoted 3 times in 6 years and skipped levels of promotion because it got recognized. So sometimes you do have to, even though you may not want to leave because you love your team and you love the people around you, sometimes you have to make those difficult decisions. And when I was leaving, the chair came up to me and he was so upset. He's like, "Why are you leaving?" I said, "Well, I told you I wanted, to do this." He's like, "I'll give you whatever position you want. You could be vice chair, this, that." And I said, "It's too late at this point." At that point, I had already made my decision. Because again, we kept saying you have to promote more women and get women involved, and it just wasn't happening. So sometimes you have to make a difficult decision of leaving.
And I think those are really great points. This is Nancy, about transparency and voicing your concerns in the right way. And I think, sometimes, like Tony said, people need some feedback, and to be transparent about what your numbers are, that, we have this gap, this disparity. And you talked about it in the first session with the awards, about like identifying that there was a gap and that more males were getting the awards than females. We may have one more minute. I'll leave it to Namita. She let us extend our time a little bit.
Yeah, this is a fabulous session. If there's a really quick question, we could probably take it, but I think we're at the end. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Bye.